This Week in Richmond is made possible in part by Dignity Memorial, caring for our communities with a network of funeral homes and cemeteries in Virginia and throughout North America. More information about Dignity Memorial's providers is online at dignitymemorial.com.
Alpha Natural Resources. Consistent with its running right process, Alpha is an energy company committed to being a leader in mine safety and an environmental steward. We fuel progress around the world. More information at alphanr.com.
Haley Buick GMC, the place for a new Verano or Terrain Denali, on Midlothian Turnpike in Richmond and online at haleybuickgmc.com. Taking it to the streets and helping our community. Intelligent Illuminations. We make streetlights smart and give you control, providing secure point-to-point wireless solutions for roadway and area lighting, helping you manage, monitor, and control your streetlights. More information at ilooms.com. The Virginia Chamber of Commerce, the voice of the Virginia business community, working in legislative, regulatory, and political arenas to promote the free enterprise system. Information at vachamber.com.
I just received a letter from a student who thanked me for instilling the love of math in him. That's why I teach.
Brought to you by the Virginia Education Association, because a good education is good for everybody.
Additional support is provided by these sponsors. And by the members of Virginia's public television stations. Thank you.
Welcome to This Week in Richmond, and a very special welcome to Melvin Carter. I'm tempted to say Chief Carter, because in fire service, it's like once you're a chief, that's the title, but Melvin Carter, the Executive Director for the Department of Fire Programs for the Commonwealth of Virginia. But prior to that, you were a Deputy Chief of Operations at City of Richmond, your native city.
Yes.
And also our viewers should know that you had a time that you spent in the Marines and the Air National Guard, and way back when you first got into fire service, that you were a volunteer firefighter in the county of Henrico. So as many of the folks who become career firefighters, yours began as a volunteer. But we really want to invite you to talk about the Department of Fire Programs and about what you see happening within the department, some of your vision for the department in 2015. So welcome.
Oh, thank you very much, David. Thank you for having me here. And yes, you are right. I interchangeably get referred to as Melvin Carter, Chief Carter, and I answer to both, and I'm proud of both.
Yes.
So you're absolutely right. That's typically the norm with respect to the fire service. The Virginia Department of Fire Programs is a wonderful agency. It's one of 11 agencies in the portfolio of the Secretary of Public Safety and Homeland Security. My particular agency is an agency that supports the Commonwealth's fire services through education and training, professional development, grants management, and coordination of subject matter expertise with respect to local emergencies around the Commonwealth. We also provide strategic preparedness information to the governor in the time of need. The agency is comprised of 7 locations around the state. We have 74 full-time employees and nearly 400 part-time adjunct employees. I'm very proud and very happy to be the executive director of this agency and look forward to doing some wonderful things with it. As it relates to my vision and strategic plan for the agency, there are a lot of different things that I think the agency can do moving forward. First and foremost, though, is fire fatalities around the Commonwealth. I believe that one fire fatality is one fire fatality too many in the Commonwealth. So working together with the partners, the fire service partners from around the Commonwealth, to include the Virginia Fire Services Board. The Fire Marshal's offices itself resides within the Department of Fire Programs. And Ed Altizer, who is the state's fire marshal, is eagerly and very happy about what we see coming in the near future with respect to community risk reduction. And community risk reduction is nothing more than fire services nationwide, looking at any and every aspect of our customers' lives and the things that they do and their practices, be it safe and non-safe, and how can we look at the data and look at and develop evidence-based practices to support reducing the risk in those communities. Secondarily to that, well, I shouldn't say secondarily to that, but along the lines of the vision would be, I would say, technology, making sure that we're staying abreast and at the cutting edge of technology. Obviously, the world is changing very rapidly, and we have to look internally, look at ourselves, and to ensure that we're providing the most efficient processes available to our customers. And our primary customers are those firefighters from around the Commonwealth, which is predominantly the volunteer ranks, which composed of mainly 69% of the firefighters from around the Commonwealth. Those firefighters now, less than they were previously, really don't have the time, in some cases, to devote to the rigors of maintaining the certification hours necessary to maintain their certification. So therefore, we have to look for ways to address alternatives to meeting those needs to help them where they are. And I think technology goes a long way to doing that. Recruitment and retention. As I previously stated about the volunteer ranks being the predominant in terms of the Commonwealth's fire services. Back in the 50s and 60s, when the workforce was very different, it was much easier to support a all-volunteer contingent response capability. But those days are rapidly changing, and so we have to look at different ways to attract people to the volunteer fold and provide resources that meets their needs, that achieves a parallel mission of meeting the needs of the community, as well as ensuring that they receive the professional development through training and education that they need for the roles that they're serving. Also, succession management. I truly believe, and it's one of my passions, is to make sure that we train the next generation of fire service leaders and working together with the other stakeholders around the Commonwealth. We're doing just that, meeting periodically with a cadre of diverse individuals from around the state to look at all facets of how we can better align what we do in terms of fire programs, in terms of the other affinity groups, to ensure that the Commonwealth's fire services is on point and ready to lead into the next millennium.
You have quite a vision, quite a challenge, and I think to go back and underscore something you said, so our viewers would make sure they catch it, that the training that takes place really is something that's provided from the state level down into the localities, the training. And when you're talking about the new technologies, are you envisioning some of that training moving more to using the new technology instead of someone standing up in front of a class and everyone having to be there at the same time? Is that something that...
Well, yes and no. We are talking about a blended approach, I believe is what you're describing.
Yes.
There still needs to be the classroom environment, but there also still needs to be that hands-on approach as well, that tactile or didactic learning, if you will. But when I talk about technology, I'm really talking about infusing the classroom with computers and providing simulated emergencies or situations that allows the user or the student to practice these evolutions over and over and over without the risk and the cost associated with going through those training evolutions. And with today's student, who are definitely more computer savvy, this form of learning may be more identifiable and maybe more appreciated by that particular student. But they're just the fire service, the global fire service, the nation's fire service, as well as the Commonwealth's fire service, with respect to technology, is growing by leaps and bounds. And our agency wants to not only keep pace, but be on the forefront of that technology. And I think our students will appreciate it because if you have the technology, if the technology exists, if you can go to the bank or the grocery store and other places and use technology, then why can't we here in the Department of Fire Programs also tap into that?
Yeah, and perhaps that use of that technology might even be effective in recruiting some of those ones who are so technologically savvy that they would say, well, this is an exciting way to learn.
Absolutely. Yes, definitely using technology to recruit, as well as using the technology to train, I think is a huge benefit. As in most facets of life now, you have to look for alternative methods to achieve your goals. And you, as the old saying goes, you can't continue to do the same thing over and over and expect a different result. So fire programs, when I became the director, obviously I came from a career fire department. And so I was a customer, or the city of Richmond
Right,
was a customer
right.
of fire programs. And so now I'm internal to fire programs, and so I'm sharing some of my experiences and experiences of my previous fire departments and other fire departments as now the director to kind of give an idea of the leadership in fire programs so that we can best tailor our objectives to meet the needs and the goals of our community.
Yeah, you know, I think our viewers too would be interested to know that the funding that you receive in your department to provide all the services that are provided statewide is something that we, the homeowners,
Yes.
help provide, that it's
Absolutely.
not really from what you might say from tax revenues, not some of the state taxes.
Absolutely. It's not general fund funded.
Yes.
It's through insurance services, 5 different line areas of insurance, which helps to fund the $30 million that operates the grant funding for the fire service as well as for the operating budget of Virginia fire programs. Yes, sir.
And I think that be additional reasons why, as that funding comes through the homeowners and others who are insured, that there's even significant reason there to try to do the preventative part.
Absolutely. Absolutely. As I said earlier, one fire death is one fire death
Yes.
too many. And through community risk reduction, we hope to, around the state, get our men and women in the fire services or in the emergency services back into their communities, engaging the community, and really refocusing our intent, our mission, if you will, our efforts into reducing the Commonwealth's fire deaths. It's 2015, and when you look at injuries as well as deaths, I think that we all will agree we can do a better job. And so as a new director, well, not so new anymore, but as the director,
Yes.
that's chief among and my missions as well as the fire marshal's mission. And I know I speak for all the fire chiefs and the leadership around the state that they also feel the same way.
The fire service at the local level,
Yes, sir.
you were in a career department, in a sense all paid in the city of Richmond, and when you were a volunteer in Henrico years ago, Henrico and many jurisdictions have departments that are some volunteers and some paid. And
Yes.
then I guess you get out in the rural areas, they're almost predominantly volunteer.
Absolutely. Virginia is fortunate enough to have several facets of its fire service, career, volunteer combination, military, private fire brigades, and other. And you're right, it spans from a very densely populated urban core to a very sparsely populated rural area. But no matter where you provide emergency services around the state, the end result is the same, and that's to prevent, serve, and protect. And the mission of this agency is to make sure that we provide the resources, the professional development, and the support to make sure that we achieve that mission and that everyone goes home at the end of that tour, that we do what we can to make sure that no lives are lost with respect to this career.
Thank you very much, Director Carter, Chief Carter.
Thank you, David.
Appreciate your
appreciate
being on
it.
This Week in Richmond. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Have a great day.
Thank you.
All right.
As we come back to This Week in Richmond, I'd like to welcome Jay Poole, Common Sense Strategies, like that name. And folks here around the Richmond area know you, and around the state too. You've been involved in government relations, communications, strategic planning for 30 years. You must have started as a child.
Yeah, it must have been.
Yeah.
Right, David.
Yeah. And as we're here kind of on the eve of the beginning of the 2015 session, wanted to talk with you, get some of your take and on some of the big issues that will be coming up in the General Assembly, and even how you think they might be resolved. So what's on the list, Jay?
Well, first of all, David, thanks for having me. And it's,
Yes.
you're a great leader in your own right here in Richmond, the General Assembly. It's a pleasure to be on your show, and
Thank you.
and thank you for having me. I think the session this year might be mercifully quiet from what we're hearing. I think that the budget situation, from what we read and hear, seems to have resolved itself. And while that always is going to be a significant part of any General Assembly
Right.
session, I think the money part is going to be much less contentious than it was in the past years. I think we've all heard discussions about perhaps reining in some of the tax breaks that seem to have multiplied like amoebas. And I was speaking with the senior member of one of the money committees who suggested that there are many, many fine ideas for money to be used and for great ideas to be funded, but unless and until we find a way to identify sources of money, i.e. like reducing some of these tax breaks, it's just not likely to happen. And when you talk about tax breaks, you're always, someone's ox is going to get gored while someone
Right.
else taketh away. So it's just difficult to see in much of an environment where we're going to do anything in budgeting other than just sort of do the status quo, and everybody acts like a statesman, appears to be statesman, and I think we come to some quiet resolution which solves most of the needs.
You know, the interesting thing that some of the media has picked up on already is that they really don't have to pass a budget bill if they get down to the end and the last of the balancing. If they can't get agreement between the administration and the General Assembly. They did that once before, I think, in the Gilmore administration.
Well, and they've done it before,
Right.
but at the same time, I think there are some items within in the larger context of the budget, which, you know, not to suggest that $10 million is not a lot of money, because it is, but there are places where monies could be reallocated, and it's going to take legislative agreement to make it so. One such area might be in the whole area of workforce development. Those who are watching the show might remember that was one of the strongest and most visible platforms of the McAuliffe candidacy for governor, and I think we've heard Majority Leader Cox talk about how large amounts of money which have been allocated toward workforce development, and the taxpayers really haven't received the bang for the buck that you'd hope they would. So I suspect that there's going to be some movement in the whole area of workforce development. Lots of governors have talked about it. Lots of governors have tried it. There have been a lot of committee hearings about it. But I think this might be a time, and especially in the context of we've got general budget agreement anyway, that you might find some areas of agreement in the whole area of workforce realignment, which might have some immediate impact, but certainly lead to better progress down the road.
Yes, and this may be the time that all of those stars are aligned with the study from the Joint Legislative Audit Review Commission, JLARC, and then, as you said, the House Majority Leader. Of course, he serves on that, and then the governor. So they may get something worked out. So what's on beyond that then?
Well, I think everybody, if you read the newspaper or watch television or check your news on the internet, I think ethics reform or ethics discussions are going to be at the forefront of discussions about this General Assembly, whether it's amongst members themselves, whether it's amongst the media, however it's portrayed. You can't be anything other than a Coleman and not be cognizant of the things that are occurring with respect to Governor McDonnell and Mrs. McDonnell. I think it's going to be an impetus of some. There will be an impetus for something, and I don't think it would be. I can't imagine there won't be some kind of substantive ethics reform made. But I think at the same time, we need to be careful as a public to not the expectations of legislators and what they should be doing and how they should be doing it are so overinflated. These are part-time legislators.
Yes.
45 days a year, 2 years, 60 days a year in 2 years. They have an avalanche of legislation which is introduced many times at the behest of their own constituents. It's virtually impossible for them to understand all the comings and goings of all these different bills and all this different legislation. Then we have the budget on top of that without having some kind of the input and education that goes along with the process, and that's where I think we have undue expectations of our legislators. We want them to do the best job, but we want them to do it independently. Well, unfortunately, it just doesn't work like that. That's why we have systems of advocacy in place. And I think that that's where we can, in a practical and common sense way, that we don't want to diminish the advocacy, but we want to ensure that it's as public and visible as possible, and then the public can make their own decisions and make their own acknowledgments of what's enough and what's not too much.
You know, I for one, and probably you would agree, we'll see, think that it's very important that our chief executive have funds to do economic development. Well, in a similar way, there are key legislators at times who are very interested in certain projects that could come to their region. And so they need to go and see what's happening in that industry in another country. So if the changes in the ethics rules got so narrowly construed, you could almost be preventing them from being able to take that trip because an industry is willing to pay for it to send them overseas or someplace else or somewhere else in the U.S. to study an issue. So while I applaud the efforts of all governors of both parties to try to get out and do economic development, we've got many legislators who try to do the same.
Absolutely, and I think that you make a really important point about education. Legislators are there are legislative conferences, conventions of other legislators throughout the year, and there probably aren't really that many very new ideas, but there probably are new ideas or new ways of doing things that might be occurring in Iowa that would be new to legislators in Virginia. The only way that legislators are going to have an opportunity to learn more about what other people are doing in other ways that might advance the cause of liberty and make for better government in Virginia is for our legislators to attend some of these conferences. They don't get to choose where the conferences are held.
That's
they
correct.
go where the conferences are held, and so I think that's another example of where in addition to economic development, it's also about good governance.
Yes.
It's not the legislator's fault that a conference might happen to be in Miami. That's where the conference is held. It's good for the people in Miami. But it's bad if we create a system where our legislative leaders are reluctant to go simply because of the location of the meeting. I think that's a little short-sighted, but I think it gives us an opportunity to talk about the value of what these kinds of conferences, the value of economic development, and how it translates down to the individual taxpayer. We've got such a cynical public that I think perhaps we all need to be a little bit more cognizant that a little bit more education might also be helpful.
Yeah, the cynical public. I don't know if you want to say anything more about that, but I don't know how much of it is fueled by what they hear, what they see, what they would read. But my take on it is if the cynical public would really get involved and have as much information as possible, they wouldn't be quite as cynical.
I completely agree with that, and I think that to some extent as well that we all choose the news sources from which we receive our news. On some cases it might be certain specific networks on the right or left. In some cases it may be certain publications on the internet. It may be the morning newspaper. It may be the 6 o'clock news. It may be we don't read any news. We hear about we receive information from other people than our friends and neighbors. And most of the time our friends and neighbors are going to generally have the same kinds of views that we do. And so I think in some ways it feeds upon itself. And I like very much some of the ideas that some of the legislators have had that are percolating, and whether or not it will actually ever become legislation or not, or whether it will become part of the new standards of learning. But I think that trying to improve citizenship on the ground floor by helping children in schools and all the way up through the school at least understand and appreciate what government is, what advocacy is, and why it's important to vote, and why it's important to go hear what legislators and politicians have to say, so that maybe we can, instead of, we got a cynical public, but perhaps we can sort of rebuild that from the ground up to create a next generation of citizens who are going to be perhaps a little less cynical and a little less apathetic about politics, and that will ultimately, I think, lead to better discourse and more civil discourse, and you don't even have to have a big discussion about redistricting.
And it will be out of that new generation coming forth that our legislators will emerge, who will be serving again as part-time citizen legislature, and here in Virginia. And
I think back to and my grandfather was in the General Assembly from Wythe County back in the late 40s and early 50s, and politics was much different back then. But at the same time, they went out. They had dinner together and they had drinks together and they talked politics and they talked business, but they had this collegial attitude. The politics was tough. The politics was very tough, but they had this collegial attitude that we've got to find ways to get things done. And I think that perhaps that might be the kind of nirvana to which we should aspire. That we can and should have significant public policy agreements on the big issues of the day. But that doesn't mean that we can't, at the end of the day, recognize that we got those disagreements, and when we can, sit down and have enough comedy to find some middle ground on them.
Jay Poole, Common Sense Strategies. Thank you very much for the conversation today here as the session begins, and I ask our viewers to stay tuned to see what will be happening during the General Assembly. Thank you, Jay.
Thank you, David. I appreciate you having me.
This Week in Richmond is made possible in part by Dignity Memorial, caring for our communities with a network of funeral homes and cemeteries in Virginia and throughout North America. More information about Dignity Memorial's providers is online at dignitymemorial.com.
Alpha Natural Resources, a leader in mine safety and an environmental steward.
Haley Buick GMC in Richmond and online at haleybuickgmc.com. Intelligent Illuminations, helping you manage, monitor, and control your streetlights. The Virginia Chamber of Commerce, the voice of the Virginia business community.
The Virginia Education Association, because a good education is good for everybody.
Additional support is provided by these sponsors. And by the members of Virginia's public television stations. Thank you.